Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Inside the Arena podcast. Today, we'll be diving into a topic that is particularly very, very profound and incredibly important, which is mental health advocacy and the power of empathy. Our guest today is an extraordinary individual whose life experience has taken him on a journey from the private sector to humanitarian work, from thriving competitive sports to becoming a mental health advocate and the CEO of the Human Aspects Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Jimmy, a key figure in reshaping how we perceive and approach mental health. Today's episode, we would explore his fascinating journey, the vision behind the Human Aspect Foundation, and the impact of empathy in building a more peaceful and united world. So, hello, Jimmy. How you doing? And thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation with me today.
Hello, Tony, and thank you so much for having me as a guest as well. It's a pleasure. We love doing this. You know, the beauty of technology. Doing recording. You're doing it in Nigeria. I'm doing it here in Oslo, Norway. So it's a pleasure to be here, and especially on such an important topic: mental health, the power of empathy, and in general, two men sitting talking about it. I think it's important.
Yeah, I really, really think that it's important. Before we begin, you just made something I really think I can piggyback off, talking about two men sitting down, talking about mental health. I think that is something that is not particularly a thing, especially from where I come from Nigeria and my own culture. 2 years ago, I actually lost my mom. It was a really, really profound time in my life. I went through the grieving process. It was a roller coaster. I think that's the best way to just put it. One of the ways I was able to actually heal, and move forward a little bit was a couple of friends of mine. They recommended support groups for me, some in America, and I was attending online, like the power of technology, like you actually just mentioned right now. And after all of that, he actually made me understand that there's a lot of people going through this type of issues, and the best way we can actually start talking is to have open conversations. And that was how I felt like I could do something with my own experience and help maybe bring these stories to life and get people involved a little bit to make them understand. I actually understand that you have a very, very profound story as well, so I would like for you to actually share yours too, so the audience can get a sense of the type of conversation we're going to be having today and get familiar with you a little bit.
Yes, thank you for sharing, Tony. Grief is the only challenge that every human will face at one time or another. As long as we live long enough, we will start losing people that we love, and I think it's a challenge that many people forget
Hmm.
about because it's also a challenge that we're not talking about. In most cultures, we're not talking about how to face grief, even though it's something everyone goes through. So I think it's very important to start with the challenges that everyone can recognize themselves with as well, and making the mental health aspect of grief something that helps people understand mental health in a better way. So I'm sorry for your loss. I also lost my grandmother when I was quite young. That was the most important figure in my life at the time. So I was 22 only. And it's the same way you describe it, had a profound impact on my life and completely turned things around in many ways. And as you said, it was a roller coaster, and all the roles that you have to deal with as well, facing grief. I was the natural person in the family that would give a speech and that would organize and support the family. My mom took another role. People took different roles, and suddenly I find myself in church where everyone was crying and I was supposed to give a speech. So suddenly my feelings were just shut down in many ways. Trying to be the strong one, right? Trying to fill a role. And just experiencing that just
Hmm.
emphasized the problem that I'd been going through since I was young. So, to try to give a short version, I grew up in a very small village. It was like 500 people. And my family had fled from a much bigger city in the middle of Norway. And they had fled from abuse and violence from my grandfather. So, even before I was born, there was a lot of trauma for my aunt, for my mother, and for my grandmother. And they moved. My grandmother found a new man, started a new family in this small place. And when I came into the world, I was a so-called accident as well. So my biological father didn't want anything to do with me. So I came kind of troubled into life. And my family was different than a lot of the people that was living there. So was I when I grew up. I think I had to deal with too many adult things in the young age. So I felt different. I started to get bullied after a while. I have ADHD, which also made me, the typical problem child in school, struggled to sit still, struggled to control my emotions, and I was a very active young man that found the classroom tricky. Even though I was very smart in the sense I was good in school, but just when I wanted to and when I could sit still. And when I got into what we would call upper secondary here, so when you're 13, you start the next stage. And then you start going to school with people that are from other villages. So I had so big expectations that it would get better. I was like, now maybe I'll find some new friends. Maybe the bullying will kind of go down a bit and I'll feel like I belong a little bit more. And I had just been kind of the weekend dad solution with my biological father. So even at this point, I had a stepfather who was a fantastic man. I still went a couple of times a month to my biological father, and he was an alcoholic and struggled heavily. So I experienced as well quite a lot of distress while I was there. So everything happened at the same time. And then when I started that school, I realized that it wasn't going to get better. Potentially it got worse. And that's where I ended up in a suicidal kind of part of life where I gave up on life and I couldn't see myself continuing. So I planned my own suicide when I was 13. I'm very lucky to have survived that week between my plan was put and when I was supposed to do it. And that was again my grandmother that said something in that time because my mom had also gotten sick. The typical, a lot of things you can't control. My mom got sick, my father was an alcoholic, bullying at school. Most of us have different things that we don't really control, especially when we're young, that impact us. And eventually, kind of, the glass is full. And then it's easy to go into the mode of feeling like, what's the point of all of this? I don't really see a future. But my grandmother was the first one who asked me, how are you feeling in all of this with your mom going on? And then my mom was sick. And that combined with my best friend who kind of just stuck around with me and kind of that week did activities with me without really understanding what was going on. He just understood something was not right. And once I got through that week, that's where sports kind of helped me to fuel my to fuel my world. So I guess there's a lot more to that story, but we can take it step by step, I guess. So the first time I met mental health in a very severe way, without knowing that it was that, I didn't tell anyone. And I was 30 years old when I first told people that I had been suicidal at the age of 13. But after that, sports became my ambition. I wanted to get into athletes college because that means I would have gotten a chance to move away to another big city and move away from my family and all the troubles and the bullying. So that was kind of the next step in the story.
You said something about being 13, not telling anyone what you were going through, and some of the things that helped you overcome that particular phase in your life. Um, Looking back at it right now, if there's someone listening to this, right, and they do have that a 13-year-old around them, given the fact that people were around you and no one actually noticed that something like that was going on and you didn't say anything, what would you advise parents, guardians, siblings, loved ones to look out for when they have young people around them?
Yeah, no, I think the most important thing to know about suicidal kind of periods and the suicidal mindset is that at the same time as I probably wanted to be seen more than any other time in my life, I was also further away from opening up than I've ever been. And that's kind of a conundrum that it's like that. So the challenge of it all is that at the same time as you really want support, you don't want to open up. So it's very difficult to see. You're actually actively working to hide it in many ways. So I would say the most important things for parents and for people to look out for, especially in teenagers, is when their behavior changes over time. Teenagers, their behavior changed anyways, and it did for me as well. But if it changes over time, if you have a very outgoing teenager and suddenly they get withdrawn, or the opposite, if you have a withdrawn teenager who suddenly sparks out, and this lasts for weeks and months, this is normally a sign that something is wrong. So if you haven't properly talked to them, then I would recommend to try to go into a situation, for example, taking a drive, taking a walk, because it doesn't work to just say to the teenager, no, how are you doing? How are you really doing? I think we need to talk. This kind of forced way of getting them to open up rarely works. But driving a small drive or walking a small walk normally helps people to take down their guard. And that's where you can just start asking simple questions of, how are you feeling about the financial situation these days, where it's tough on us, or how are you feeling when my dad and we separated, or how are you feeling when grandma died, or because parents have a tendency to understand what is going on. They have heard something. It's just that they normally don't want to believe that it's impacting their teenager in such a heavy way. But that would be my first recommendation for that element. But I'm sure we're going to talk more about it as well.
Yeah, we are going to talk more about it. So let's jump into the Human Aspects Foundation and its origin. What is actually the Human Aspects Foundation, and what was its original primary goal?
I struggled with self forgiveness. We talk about self care, we talk about self love. You can't do it if you're keeping yourself on a hook.
I think I was scared a lot because I didn't know where my place in this planet was.
He thinks that I'm this, yes, and then I started to believe that. Negative thoughts.
I've been struggling with my gender identity for a really long time.
Young people jump on social media and they see people that have it all figured out. The world is so catered towards recognition of superstardom, of massive success, of huge productivity.
The first thing you should do, as soon as you finish watching this video, is get yourself in front of a mirror and start the conversation that you find the most difficult to have. Difficult discussions are the best thing ever.
The Human Aspect Foundation is a foundation that is behind what is today the largest free mental health resource, which is called the Life Experience Library. You will find it, in thehumanaspect.com. It's an open library where you find the lived experience journeys of more than 800 people from more than 100 countries. And I've done all the interviews together with my teams. We have traveled around the world and also gotten people to visit different places. And you will find then specific therapeutic interviews, video interviews. You will find podcasts. You will find small infographics and articles and mini documentaries that we also made 14 of. So it's basically a tool where you can find self-help, but it's also a tool where you can support your teenager or utilize it at work. If you're a social worker or a mental health worker or a community health worker, you can also utilize it there. So it's basically a massive tool. The origin story kind of is the next part of my life story.
Yeah.
So I got into athletes college. I didn't think about mental health challenges in the same way for a while. I focused on, mental training and sports and competitiveness. And I moved to a big city alone. So even though it was difficult, it was also more exciting now in a different way. But when I was finished those 3 years, I was 19. I had to go into the armed forces or the military, which is mandatory at the time. So I ended up in the special forces, and I ended up becoming a rescue diver in the Coast Guard, which is close to the North Pole in the very cold sea up north. And I was there for a year thinking about what will I do now? Should I go back to my athlete career or should I now go to study, which I've been told my whole life. So I was sitting in the special forces as a rescue diver, and I was thinking about how to continue my life. So I realized that I had to start studying at the university. and I started studying shipping. It was very popular at the time. It was something where you think you could get a job, and it was something that interested me. I had always lived close to the sea and close to waters, and shipping in Norway is a very big industry. So I started studying there, and after just 1 year in school, I was actually headhunted by the biggest shipping company in the world. So I was extremely fortunate, coming from a very poor background and had no connections or anything in shipping. And suddenly they asked our school if we had some talented people, and I was fortunate to be one of them. So in the age of 21, I was full-time hired to work for this company, and my life was turned completely upside down. Suddenly I was someone who could contribute financially to my family, and I could take that responsibility as a man as well, which was also something that I was very grateful for. Suddenly I could give a small supported gift to my sister and try to help people where they needed it and support my friends. And then I actually worked in shipping for 7 years, while I also was a professional youth coach for football, and I was a mental health trainer for top level athletes at the same time. And then I was an expat in Singapore when I was 27. So in the end of my shipping career, I went there, feeling that I was successful, feeling like now I was a person people looked up to. Again, not really thinking about mental health other than when I was 20, 22, 23, where I lost my grandmother. But, as I said, similar to you, I took the grief like a man and I kind of suppressed it.
Yeah.
I didn't really acknowledge it properly. And in Norway as well, I don't know if you know this, but in Norway we have a very strange custom when it comes to grief. It's not like you get a proper week to grieve with your family off work, or it's not routines like that. It could be that you get 3 hours off, you go into the office in the morning, you go to church, and then you come back and you go back to the office.
Wow.
It's complete madness. We
Wow.
look at grief very poorly here. And then sitting in Singapore, I had been there 6 months when I played a football match, because I still played football, for fun at an okay level. And I shattered a disc in my spine and ended up in the hospital, losing a lot of the nerves to my right leg, and was in excruciating pain. And I'm in the other side of the world. Singapore is in Southeast Asia, so it's 15 hours away from my family in Norway. So I was alone. I was scared in many ways. I didn't know if this was for life. Would I be semi, disabled? Would I? How would this impact my career? Would I have to move back home? And I was told that I had to go through surgery, and that I would never be able to do top level sports again, and that it would probably impact me. But I was young, so they thought, okay, you can probably battle through this. And that's, I think, the first time in my life where I sat down and asked myself big questions like, why am I here? Am I doing this for society? Am I doing this job because I want to support my family? Am I doing it because my friends think it's cool? Or why am I here? And that's where I realized that I've always wanted to work more with people than to be in business and working in shipping. And, it was interesting, but not really close to my heart. So I decided to quit shipping. I had to do 18 months of recovery. So I finished my bachelor's in business and management while I was sick. And that's where I decided to change my career to Doctors Without Borders. So I went into Doctors Without Borders. My first mission was Afghanistan. And I went a year to Afghanistan, a country at war, very different from me. I even though I'm not coming from the most privileged background in Norway, I'm very privileged to be from Norway, and I'm very aware of that. So coming to a country like Afghanistan was difficult, but also helped me realize that how lucky we are in many ways, but also helped me see the world through eyes that I needed to learn. And we had a big bombing of our hospital in Afghanistan, where I lost a lot of colleagues, similar to what we see now in Gaza, where the Allied forces and the Americans bombed our hospital. And it was a huge situation. We went out and called the Americans that they had gone through a war crime. It was a horrible situation to be in, and I was one of the leaders in the organization at the time in Afghanistan. So I was very close to the situation. And I thought that I was the only one not really talking about things, because I had grown up in a very masculine context, small village. My uncle, my grandfather, everybody was like macho men. Both my uncles were boxers and they were practical people. My stepfather is 194, so I grew up in the context of big boys don't cry. You probably feel the
Yeah.
same and recognize this, I guess.
Yes, yes.
So at this point, I thought that people talked about emotions, and especially maybe women, but that I didn't. But when this happened in Afghanistan, and we were hundreds of people from 50 different nationalities, none of them spoke about it.
Wow.
And it surprised me. I was thinking, like, why? Why are we not talking about difficult things? As you said, this was grief, this was shock, this was war trauma. We got psychologists that tried to help us, but no one really talked about it. And that's where the original idea for the human aspect started cooking in my head. I was thinking, we need to do something about this. It seems like there is nothing between life and a psychologist. And I wanted something to fill that gap. And that's where I started thinking about, what if we had a low threshold tool that was for free, where I could learn from normal people and how they have faced challenges? Because that's the way I'm brought up in the village. If you don't know mathematics, you have someone who can teach you. If you don't know how to ride a bike, someone will teach you. So I wanted to create the same for life, because my problem was I had no one in my family that experienced war. So I had no one to talk to and ask about these things. And that's where, when I came back from Afghanistan, I went on another mission in Greece and Syria for Doctors Without Borders. And when I came back home, that's when I decided to start and contribute to build that tool.
Wow. And how has the journey been so far, and what has been the impacts of the human aspect?
So, everything in the beginning is just an idea. So in the beginning, it was just a small idea. I thought maybe it would be a blog, or maybe it would be an Instagram account. I didn't envision it to be my life, which it has been the last 7 years. But we went on the streets, took a camera, and I knew that I had always been very good at getting people to open up. So growing up, I was the person who people talked to. If they had problems or they were struggling with some feelings, they normally talked to me. And my grandmother was the same. My mom was the same as well. So I guess I have it from them in my family. So growing up, this allowed me to get a talent. And I used that talent going to interview people on the streets and asking them about the three major things. What is your biggest challenge that you have faced in life? And I challenged them to talk deep about it. Emotions, reflections, going deep, being vulnerable, crying, being silent, talking about the difficult things that you don't want to talk about. And part 2 was the journey. How did you face this challenge? How did you heal? How did you move forward? And part 3 was, what did you learn from this? What are the reflections and thoughts that this challenge brought to you? And that was part 3 of the interviews. So in the beginning, we weren't really sure how it would go, but after a while, we realized that this is not just therapeutical, which it is, but it's also something that engages people. It's something that people wanted. So when we pushed it out 6 months later, we got very good reach. People saw it in the Philippines, in Nigeria, in the US, all over the world suddenly. People started watching this through social media, of course. And then we had the full videos that was in the library, and we made small clips that we shared on social media that became very popular very quickly. So the journey started slowly, but then I managed to get some more people to join the team. I convinced companies to support us as well for free because we didn't have any investors or anything like that, because we are a foundation. So it's nothing you can invest in. Either you donate support or there's nothing. So moving into that, the company grew very quickly, and we realized we needed professionals on the video production side because we weren't good at that. So we took in students that wanted to work on this, and we took in psychology students on the other side because we realized we need to verify the interviews so that we make sure they have a therapeutical good value for people who watch it. So basically, that was the first year where we battled to survive, tried to find fundings. We applied for grants, worked for free, like you're eating crisp bread and water and rice with salt. You're living very.
Yeah.
You're putting everything online to do this. So that was the first year. Was very tough, but we were growing slowly, I would say, the first year.
Yeah. So what has been the feedback from individuals who have come across the Human Aspect Library? What is the most common feedback you get a lot?
I think the most common feedback is that people watch these clips on social media and the full interviews. The full interviews are 45 to 70 minutes long. They have a therapeutical value. So we now know watching one interview will help the person to reflect, put better words, open up, and take a first step in their own journey. And so the feedback has been that they've never really seen anything like this. They've not seen such open interviews. And they also finally feel that they're not alone. And that was the magic. I remember in 2017, it was going tough. I was considering, can we even do this, financially? Is it possible? Is there a way to do this? And then I got a message from a man called Lester in the Philippines, on the other side of the world, in Asia. And he sent me this long message, and he thanked me for making the human aspect. And he said that he was going through a suicidal depression because of his family was in economic distress. They had lost his father, and that he had to step up and he had to quit school to start working to support his family. So a classic challenge that I know many Nigerians as well is facing. And he said that he had given up on life and he didn't really see any hope. And then he found a video of a Norwegian person that I had interviewed who said the same. And that when he watched that interview, he decided not to do it. And he decided to open up, and he decided to change a little bit the way that he worked through life. And I remember that just gave me all the motivation I needed. I just knew that I have to do this and continue forward. So the feedback is everything from people just finding it's beautiful and interesting to learn about other people and realize that they're not alone, to people that have made massive steps in their own life, both saving lives like that, but also people who have faced depression or anxiety or grief. To say that they have learned something from these interviews that helped them to face it better, and also help them to seek professional help or talk to the people around them.
You just said something about someone reaching out to you from the Philippines. You talked about working in Afghanistan, and after the tragic incident that happened, nobody was talking about it. I guess my question is, having worked in various parts of the world, having interviewed people from various parts of the world, what would you say are the common universal aspects of mental health? There's this saying, this popular saying, the man who said the tallest mountain in his village is the tallest mountain in the world, or the tallest mountain is has seen is the tallest mountain that ever existed, right? But sometimes I think we are blinded to think that our situation is the worst, or these things only happen in our lives, in our environments. And one thing I've really, really learned from diving into the human aspects library is people have similar stories. Like, we are no different from each other. At the end of the day, we are human beings with maybe different experience, but vastly the same kind of reactions to those experiences, right? So we always want to be validated. Emotional connection is very, very important to us. We always want to have a community around us and the rest of it. So what would you say, in your own words, is the universal aspects of mental health that you've experienced personally and up close?
I think number one that we realized in the human aspect, and I called it the human aspect. And there's a reason why I did that. And that is first and foremost because when I grew up, I was told that we humans are shaped by two things: our genetics and, our mom and dad and their family tree, and the environment that we grow up in. But there was one problem for me, and that was number one, I didn't feel like I fitted in my family and that I was similar to them. I felt like the person who stuck out. And in the environment I grew up, I felt I was the same. So this explanation didn't really make sense to me. So I was thinking, what else is really shaping us as people? And then I realized it's the life we live, it's the challenges we face, and it's how we grow through those challenges. They shape us. So that's why I called it the human aspect, because I genuinely believe that the challenges that we face make us more similar than different. And of course, as well, we know today that there's been discriminatory systems and racist systems that has also been put at play here. So telling you that you're shaped by your DNA is also part of a narrative, which is, I today believe, is very wrong, because it's made for us to be divided. But then looking at this, that's why we decided to take away as much as we could from the context and focus on the emotional experience. Because as you say, going through something, for example, grief, depression, burnout, these things, or abuse for that matter, is the same for all humans. What is different is the context. Of course, in Norway, if you go through abuse, we would say, go to your doctor and apply for a psychologist. Because in Norway, we have the most psychologists in the world per 100,000 people. But in Nigeria, I know that, saying that as a lesson or a suggestion is unrealistic, because it's not that easy to get, and maybe you can't afford it as well. And in Norway, as you know, we have a public health system, so it's for free / cheaper than it would be. I know. But what is exactly the same is how we face grief, the different stages of grief. They are the same. The way that, as I said, the Norwegian interview that helped Lester in the Philippines helped him because Chris, the Norwegian who talked about being suicidal, put the same words. He helped Lester to realize, like, yes, this is what I'm feeling. That's exactly what I'm feeling. And suddenly they connected, even though they've never met. Lester comes from a poor family in the Philippines, and Christian in Norway comes from also a normal working class family from Norway. So mental health, if you take away the context on the top, as you say, is universal. And I also genuinely believe that a big part of the human aspect, especially now the social media videos, the clips, us talking in this podcast, is just as much about helping people to realize that they're not alone. There's 280 million people going through depression right now. There's 270 million going through anxiety right now. So you're clearly not alone, but it feels like it. And that's what we need to start talking about, because we are so closed in our society that you don't even know that your neighbor is going through the same, because it would never tell you. So I think one of the important aspects of this is facing the stigma and talking about it, but talking about it in a way that is constructive. Because I would argue that Norway now has gotten to a space where is less stigma on many labels. But we are seeing that mental health challenges is still rising in Norway, just as much as in Nigeria. And the challenge of that is because we believe that we're open, just because we say the word depression. Saying that you're depressed is not therapeutic, but saying what makes you depressed is therapeutic, because it's up to the doctor to decide if you have depression or not. But what is important for the human is to say, what is going on? What is making you anxious? What is making you feel down? Why are you struggling to face this grief compared to your brother who is facing it in a different way? And that's the conversation that I think is missing. So Norway, no, we're not open as a country, even though it looks like it. We are open in a shallow way. It's okay to say you have depressed now and have anxiety or ADHD, but it's still not okay to say that you're struggling. This is what I feel is universal and also part of the problem.
Yeah. Uh, I think there's another level to that. There's another layer that we can unpack. I like saying this thing about we need to start looking at mental health from a cultural perspective in every culture, in every society. And that gives us a deeper meaning and a deeper understanding. There's this example I like using a lot. When we were younger, right? If we had friends who were feeling down, who were all of a sudden started acting differently, there's this saying we always say, you're like, what are you thinking about? You don't have kids, you have to worry about, you don't have a family to feed. So what's bothering you? Why are you so down? I say this, it took me a long time for me to actually realize that maybe that person was actually going through or experiencing depression at that particular point in their life. But because we didn't have the right words for it, we weren't educated about it. We just saw it as somebody thinking too much, right? And they had no reason for them to have that worry, right? The same thing. We all know we have that friend in our group who's like, they're always anxious, they're always scared, they don't want to do certain things, and we didn't really understand that maybe that was like some symptoms of anxiety that they were actually showing at that particular point. So understanding what mental health is from a cultural perspective, I think is very, very important for us to recognize it, so that because we often talk about mental health, and when that label comes up, everybody kind of shies away from it. They see the taboo, they see the stigma and the rest of it. But if we can begin to describe some of the effects of mental health as something that happens in our everyday lives, maybe people can start understanding that it's not this huge, it's not cancer, it's not something that is, just that is, it's something that happens every day. It's something that you might have experienced. And that's where the role of empathy comes in. I always say this. You said something about growing up in your family where there were macho men and all of that. I say this, it took me a very long time for me to realize that my mother was an individual, was a person. Because for the longest of time, right, we look at people who are older than us as people who got it all figured out. They don't show us their weakness. They don't ever get vulnerable around us. They provide. We think they have all the answers. They are wise and all of those things. So sometimes we forget that they are actually individuals who have their own life struggles, their own life challenges. And some of the reasons why they might act a certain way or the rest is because of the experiences they've had. So so whenever we actually feel like whatever we're going through is too much for us, or we are the only one going through it, knock knock, your sister in the next room might actually be going through the same thing. But we don't live in a culture and in a society where we can easily talk about this thing. So I just figured out that the best way for me to having maybe understanding this a little bit, that everybody's going through something, and I just think the best thing I can do is now embrace empathy in everything I do, in the way I communicate to people. I work with a team. If somebody is not coming through with what they're supposed to do, if all of a sudden your loved one snaps at you and the rest of it, it's just the role of empathy. So, what do you actually personally think is the role of empathy in talking about mental health and in all of this?
I think in general, as you said, empathy is probably something that has slowly disappeared from the world. If you look at the psychologist from the 50s, Maslow, who made the pyramids of needs of what we humans need, Then on the top, they made a new level, which is called self-realization. So the modern world is more about the individual. It's about us succeeding. Our parents, they worked very hard for us to be able to go to school. We have been told our whole life, that if you work hard, you can go to school, you can provide for your family. You are not going to have the same struggles as I do. That's been the battle of our parents. So we are a generation, and especially the new generation, that their main focus is themselves. They're also being told that you should follow your passion, you should follow your purpose. If you're privileged enough, you should be able to decide what jobs you want, depending on where in the world you're from. But more and more, we're striding towards success for the individual. And this is making you less empathic in general, because it's not about the community anymore. I know in Nigeria, especially on the countryside, like when I grew up in the countryside, community was everything. The church community, the Muslim community, the community around the village that you lived, in your street, in the city, or in your family. But suddenly now we are being fragmented. So I think empathy is extremely important. And especially, as you say, when we're so fragmented that we don't even talk to our best friend or our sister or our brother or our aunt or our uncle or grandma or grandfather, how are we expected to face challenges? The people around us, they're supposed to be our support system. They're supposed to be our power. This is what I think is the most beautiful of all the different countries I've visited that are further into the south, especially in the African continent, but also Afghanistan and in other parts of the world I've seen. Community is stronger, but you're also about to lose it. In Scandinavia, it's completely lost. There is no community here. It's about everyone is an individual. Everyone is fighting for themselves, maybe their family, but not really. So I think what both the human aspect and talking more about it, as we say, like this, helps us to have the conversations that is empathic. Because if we start opening up, we start realizing that, maybe the person, the boss at your job that you think is an idiot, or someone who is not respectful, or someone that drove very harshly in the street, or someone who took away your job, or someone who said something bad to you, you don't know what they're going through. If you look at conflicts, as we just spoke about, the Palestine-Israeli conflict, if you look at Ukraine-Russia conflict, like all of these things contain human beings. And I think if we start showing a little bit more empathy towards each other, especially men, but also women, then I think we can slowly understand each other more and be a little bit more open and not react as harshly every time something happens. And I think that is definitely the way to go, especially in mental health as well, because I've spoken to more than 800 people from 100 different countries. So one of the things that has been in all the interviews, when people have said what they needed or what helped them, everyone talks about someone supporting them. If it was a professional, if it was a friend or a family member, it doesn't matter. Everyone says, when I was seen, when I felt someone understood me, and when I felt someone genuinely supported me, that's where I found the strength in myself to go through the challenge. So I think empathy is key, as you said. And us men who is scared of being vulnerable and open, it's extremely damaging, because it's making us, that lonely wolf in the wolf pack that is walking outside the rest of the wolves, and you're an easy prey for life if you're walking alone, thinking that independence is something to stride for. Independence is something that will get you killed in today's modern world. And I'm not talking about the savannah where there's predators to take you down. I'm talking about life will kill you. Either you will burn out, you will get depressed, or you will maybe end up drinking drugs. So I think community and empathy is, for me, two biggest values. And there I think we in the north of Europe and Europe have tons to learn from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from South Africa, from Afghanistan, countries where community is still strong. So I would love to hear more from you as well, your take on community and how it's changing in Nigeria also.
Yeah, it's changing, and if I must say, it's not, from my perspective, it's not changing in a positive way. We are heading towards the negative side, because it's almost like we're trying to emulate the lifestyle of the Western people, right? And why I say this is because there are certain negative trends that are being propagated on the internet, right? Just like the panel we met on, right? We have a common friend, Dari. We were talking about the impact of social media on suicide prevention and people's mental health. I remember I said something. I said, what scares me the most, right? We can recognize bullying, right? Sometimes society is not fair to those type of things, right? We stand against it. We fight against it. We can see it. We can recognize it. But one of the dangers is like that flies over our heads is that we can't recognize when people are propagating their own coping mechanism, which sometimes, if it's negative, as a proper solution to everybody else. And our subconscious are picking up these things we're seeing online and on the internet and applying it to our lives without even knowing that that is where the source is coming from, because the human mind is so powerful. Because I'll give you an example. Now more than ever, people are saying, don't call me, just text me. Don't call me, just text me, right? We have gone from seeing each other all the time and communicating in person to talking on the phone, as if that was not bad enough. People don't want to do that anymore. People want to just text, right? So we are more connected than ever, and yet we are so lonely. This is the time that we have, and I think there are so many research papers to actually back this up, that loneliness is the biggest killer right now. People are lonely, people are disconnected. Even families, sometimes you might be in the same household, and if you want to say something to your siblings, you don't even walk to their room or see them until you text them. People live in the same household and they end up not seeing each other for days and the rest of it. So to go back to answering your question, I think the individuality aspect of this thing is something that is on the rise, and now more than ever we are often saying this thing, sort of like a trend on social media, like, oh, don't call me, just text me, or if you can leave it in a text, don't call me, or like, there are various aspects. I just want to be left alone. There's this trend of putting your phone on do not disturb, right? There are so many layers and aspects to this thing that we actually think it's the trend. We think it's fun. We think like that's the way we communicate in the world today. But these things are constantly making us isolated, right? So if you ask me about the community aspects of Nigeria in my country, I think it is slowly going away, because now more than ever we are just moving into an aspect, into a phase where we actually believe the trend and independency is making yourself as isolated as you can possibly be. So to me, it's really, really scary, if you ask me.
I completely agree. I've actually called, I give a lot of talks, and the new talks that I've been given, I call them, maneuvering the maze or labyrinth of independence. As you said, connecting it straight to the new trend and the data that we see on loneliness. We actually found a lot of research here in Norway that helped us explain how and why the mental health data is increasing for young people, and it touches upon what you said. And this is a very important point that I think we can all communicate further. Just think a little bit about this sentence. We have never in history, not in human history, have we ever had lower meaningful human interactions than we do right now. As you said, never in history. So even though, as you said, we are more connected than we have ever been, we are in many ways more privileged than we have ever been. If you look at poverty and these numbers, you know how to measure. Even though it's difficult for many, it's still better than it was 50 years ago. And if you take the world in average, but still, as you said, we have never had less meaningful interactions. And the fascinating part is not just family, friends, and community. There's another part to this that people have forgotten about, and that is the meaningful human interactions you normally would have with the people outside your closest circle. Meaning the people in the grocery store, meaning the person that drives the tuk-tuk, meaning the person that drives the minivan that you drive for work. Because we don't talk to them. We're sitting on our podcast, we are listening to sound messages, we are making emails on our way. So you don't even smile or say hello or ask the person next to you on the minivan how they're doing. And I know that you do this much more than we do in the north. I just came back from South Africa and from Zimbabwe. So, of course, I felt that there they talk more to each other than what I do. But I still saw the same trend, as you said. You're mimicking the West, but you're also mimicking the destruction of the West. So this is your time to be able to stop that development before you get the same problems as we do. And that is that we are extremely polarized. We don't talk to each other. Mental health is rising. And sadly, elements of society that was supposed, at least in Scandinavia, to have gotten better. For example, racism was 10 years ago was much better than it was 30 years ago. But now, the last 10 years, it's rising. And the main reason it's rising is this trend. We don't look at each other, we don't smile, we don't talk. And if you look at, as you said, the main psychological needs of what human beings need, and that hasn't changed, remember, in thousands of years. The thing that evolves the latest is our mind. Even though we think that today's kids, you and I, we are a different generation, we would look at 15-year-olds today and we would be like, whoa, they're so much smarter than we are. They're so much mature. They're so much quicker. But let's remember their brain is exactly the same as our brain because the brain takes hundreds and thousands of years to evolve. So that means even though they have living in an adult world, and we would say 13-year-olds are acting like adults, their brain is not. So that means that if you put them into a world that is supposed to be more adult, but you forget that they are just as immature as we were when we were 13, this is where you get the crash. Because they have no social interaction. Their needs of being seen are maybe at 30% of what you and I had when we grew up. And this is the recipe for an entire generation that is going to be emotionally damaged. Because they have not been met at the needs of what they needed. And that can potentially explain why we also see that a lot of young people are struggling with their mental health. So I think one of the things is restoring the community, because I think one of the most beautiful things of a church community or a community in the mosque is you have intergenerational communication and interactions. You have young people teaching grandfathers and grandmothers new words. So we are helping them to grow. But you also have grandmothers and grandfathers teaching younger people to relax. Challenges will come and challenges will go. And then you have the people in the middle, which is us, who have perspective, who will say, try to be a little bit less on social media, try to be a little bit more active. And then you have the young people teaching us to be more efficient and better at using digital media. But if you ruin community, this very important layer of teaching each other things, both up from young to old and down from old to young, disappears. And then we will have generations who basically will not be ready to face the challenges that they're going to get. And I think sadly, they're going to get bigger challenges we've ever seen, because social media, digital media, is a massive social experiment that we don't know the consequences of yet. So I completely agree with you that this is the conversation we need to have. And I don't have the full answer. I just know that we need to start creating communities and lifting the power of community. And I definitely know that Scandinavia, Europe, and the so called West need to learn from the communities in the African context. And we really need to learn to see each other with more empathy, as you said, because luckily the world is becoming international. So in Oslo, we have people from all over the world. We have a lot of Nigerians living in Oslo. And that is very beautiful, because then I think we can also learn from each other.
Yes. Let's look at it from the evolutionary psychology aspect, right? There was this loneliness expert that I listened to on Rogan's podcast, like I think 2 years ago or so. He said the reason why when people are lonely, they feel depressed, they start having suicide ideation or they panic or the rest of it is from an evolutionary point of view. When you were alone, evolutionarily in the early stage, it meant you were going to die. Because if you were away from your pack, you were exposed to the wild animals, you were exposed to starvation, you were exposed to all sort of things. So loneliness is the reason why we feel loneliness and we feel it as a form of like a negative emotion is because we needed to stay alive. Because if you were okay by just being alone, that means you were going to die. But if you felt the need to reconnect with your pack and you were feeling lonely and it was a negative energy, it forced you to go look for your pack, your community in order to stay alive. So it is a simple mechanism for us to just be alive or to exist, is the fact that we cannot afford to be alone. And it made so much sense because looking at it from that evolutionary point and the effects that it has on us today, we might not, just like you say, we may not get eaten by the wild animals or starve as it be, but life would get you. The challenges of life would actually get you. And it's still the same thing, right? That we are experiencing today. So more of, like you said, I also don't have the answer to these things, but I think you stumble on your way upwards, right? We are actually creating or giving an opportunity for the solutions to these things to come to life because the more we keep having open conversations like this, talking about these things, is it gives an opportunity for people to listen and have those type of conversations in their own personal lives and look at their lives and say, oh, okay, how can I actually improve? Because um, here I'm hearing the dangers of this trend that is going on. And if I can make that adjustment in my own personal life, maybe it will have a ripple effect on my family, my friends, and the snowball effects can begin to take place. So um there's this particular question I wanted to ask you that I found really, really fascinating. We talked about people having a difficult time having conversations with each other, right? On the like understanding that we are all going through something. How does the human aspect, right, find these individuals that come on your platform to actually share these deep, meaningful stories?
Uh, like now we are so big, so people reach out to even want to share their stories. But of course, we do all the interviews physically, so we have to be in the country or they have to be where we are to do the interview. So we try to do interview tours, traveling around, and we partner up with local organizations or we go to social media and ask people. But of course, one of the most important elements is we only interview people that have, had some form of healthy reflection, that have gotten to a space where they can look at their own journey and feel that they have gotten to a point where things are easier and better. So that's a very important element, that we only interview people who have gotten to that space.
Why is that particularly important?
Of course, it's important because all the interviews in the Human Aspect Library is supposed to provide part three as well, the lessons, the reflections. And if you share your story when you're in the middle of it, you're still lacking perspective.
Yeah.
You're not able to answer question three because you don't know the answer yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have challenges and we all stand in them. When you finished one, there's a new one that's going to come. So But the challenge that you share in the human aspect, which is the big, we ask you what is your biggest challenge that you faced in life, then you need to be in a space where you can look back at it, so that you provide into the library some form of reflectional insight that others can find to utilize. And also, as you said, I think it's very beautiful to look back into where we are in humanity right now, and say that we can do something. It's not completely hopeless, but let's have and start those conversations around the dinner table where we talk about more meaningful things, and where we don't have an objective of the conversation. Because too many conversations today is about me wanting to convince you about something, or me wanting to need you, or me trying to tell you something, instead of the more natural conversations where we could just have a question or something that happened at the work or school, and I could just ask you, well, what do you think about that? What is your take on it? The typical grandmother, grandfather conversations, the people who have, they have normally more time than we do in our modern world. And also daring to ask questions like, what is the negative impact of social media in my life? And what is the positive impact of social media in my life? And then you can ask your other generations, like your parents, and you can say, how does social media impact you? How are you using it? And suddenly we'll be able to build pieces in our understanding and our empathy, as you said. And eventually we will get to the deeper topics of, for example, one of the most meaningful questions I've asked is to dare to ask your parents, what was the biggest challenge you faced when you were 20? Because as you said, we don't really know our parents, because even like my mom is young. So even though my mom got me as young, when I was 15, when I started reflecting about things, my mom was still 35. So I never knew my mom in her 20s as an adult. So daring to ask your parents or your grandparents questions, it will help them provide you understanding that they're an individual, as you said about your mother. So it was very interesting. I started asking questions to my parents and to my grandparents, like, how was it when you married that young? I asked my stepdad, how was it to meet my mom when she had a child? And, how was it to be a stepfather to this crazy young little active kid, And suddenly they dare to share with you their vulnerabilities, and empathy is created in the space of vulnerabilities. Even though they're talking about 20, 30 years ago, you will still get a wider perspective of who they are. And I remember I lost my grandfather, and he was a very respectful man, but he was a typical man's man as well. And in the kind of the gathering after his funeral, there was a lot of people there that was his business partners and friends and people that I'd never met, because I didn't know them. And suddenly we got the conversation going where they started talking about stories about my grandfather. And it just blew my mind, because the way they spoke about my grandfather is a way that I've never seen him, because I was never his friend. I was his grandchild.
Yeah.
So obviously he reacted and behaved differently with me. So I just remember it was so beautiful to see other sides of him. But that's where I learned, I really wish I had asked him those questions myself
Yeah.
before he passed on. So that just reminded me of the importance of daring to get to know each other in the same way I do in the human aspect interviews. I sit for 2 hours and talk to people and ask them about their life the same way you do with me now.
Yeah.
And I learn a little bit about your life. Those conversations are the meaningful ones.
Yeah. You know why I really asked why it was important for people to have, overcame the struggles, right? Before they come to share that story is, I said something earlier on as people propagating their coping mechanism as a proper solution to everybody else's problem on social media and the dangers of that. Let's take, for example, there's this trend in my country, right, Nigeria, of people saying they don't believe in love. Like they would never fall in love. Like, or all men cheat. Like no matter what you do for a man, he would still cheat on you and the rest of it. And most time, that mentality comes from somebody who maybe just got their heart broken in a relationship. And immediately they pick up the phone and they make a video and they're crying. They're so emotional, right? And they're talking about, oh, I should have never given my heart to this man and all of this or to this woman. And as human beings, right, we are drawn to our emotions. It's just like when you're walking past the streets and you hear a child crying, you would stop and want to know what's going on. It's the same thing. When you see somebody emotionally expressing themselves and you're scrolling on the internet, you stop. You're drawn to it. You want to know what's going on. And if that person just recently came out of a relationship 24 hours ago or less than, and the person has not fully processed or had time to reflect on how they got to that particular point or went through that process of grieving that relationship and understanding maybe the role might have played or may not have played or the lessons they've learned from that situation. When they are immediately expressing themselves, it makes people in their own relationship, now they start being scared. Like, is this my fate? Is this what's going to happen to me? Right. So they go back into their personal lives. They start withdrawing. Right. They are not giving it their all anymore because they feel that is their fate at the end of the day. Or a man cheats on his wife and she's just all over the internet saying you should never, young women, I'm telling you this today, don't ever trust a man because this is what men do. I gave my all to this man and everything. I understand, but we should also recognize as a society that those people are not in the best position to give advice at that particular point in their lives. And we should recognize that these people need help, right? They need help at this particular time. They need to heal. So I see these as a problem. I see these as people borrowing perspective that are not originally theirs and use and applying it to their lives and the dangers that might be causing. There's this thing also like in our social media spaces, like it's your family that will bring you down. Like don't ever help your family. There's this trend about it that always goes on, and people, yeah, yeah, or
Or bad
friends or things like
friends,
that. Then
you know.
people in they are in their personal lives and they are finding it difficult to lend a helping hand to their siblings, to offer help and the rest of it because they feel like, oh, if you do all of this, you would still. I don't. My whole thing is, as much as we recognize cyberbullying, recognize all the negative impact of social media, we should also recognize that people are out in social media knowingly or unknowingly propagating their own coping mechanism as a proper solution to everybody else's problem. And we should recognize the danger because this, an idea is something that is very, very difficult to eradicate from the human mind. Once the mind catches hold of an idea, right, it is almost impossible to eradicate it from the human mind. So we should recognize that sometimes we're taking in some of these things that we don't consider harmless, but they are staying in our subconscious and they are projecting themselves in our personal lives and in our relationships. So it is very, very important to listen to advice, but from people who have move past that phase, who have overcome it and have a clear perspective and have real life lessons to actually give to us from whatever it is they've experienced. That's why I find the human aspects library very, very fascinating because, like you said, there's what the problem is, how you dealt with it, and what you learned from it, which I think is very, very, very important aspect of what you're doing.
I agree with it as well, and of course, as I've myself been in victim mentality or in a mindset where I was down or traumatized or where I was hurting, where I was pushing to simple coping strategies, as you said, and one of the most modern, popular ones, as you also pointed a little bit towards, in Scandinavia, is clean up your friends. And the challenge of that, of course, is if we all do that with the people that are struggling in our lives, then who is going to support them? Who is going to support you when you are in down? If you go through something tough for 6 months, will all your friends abandon you? So it's very dangerous to run around thinking about that. So we are supposed to support people that are going through tough times, and supporting someone with suicidal depression or supporting someone that have gone through quite something traumatic, it's not going to take 2 weeks. You can't support your friend for 2 weeks. You can support your friend for, if they're going through eating disorder or something complex, it can take years. But just you never giving up on them is also what people in those interviews tell me was the most important thing for them. That one friend that never gave up, that one friend that kept calling, that one friend that kept knocking at your door, even though you said, no, don't come here. Kept knocking on the door and said, hey, I'm here. Do you want me to help do laundry in your apartment? Let's watch a football game. And they force their way through. A little bit that annoying friend that you don't want to come when you want to be alone in your problem. So I completely agree. And that's the thing that our previous generation were so good at. The typical mother or, father figure or grandmother that no matter if you say, don't come into my room, they still did it because they knew that you needed it. So I think it's very important to recognize that fact and again have conversations about it. As you said, open conversations. What does that mean? Bad energy. What does it mean to be a bad friend? How many times can a friend hurt you for it to not be healthy? And how many times can a family member be pushing negative energy towards you before you need to give boundaries? And what is just normal? And I think the last thing I kind of want to say to try to round off as well, because we could talk about this for days, is a lot of people in today's modern society misunderstand emotions as something negative. Emotions is the most powerful system in our mind. We have our instincts, as we know. As you said, the instincts was there first. That's the oldest part of our brain. The second oldest part of our brain is our emotions. And then we have the logic, which is the latest development. But normally the logic is kind of making trouble more than it's helping at the moment. Because emotions is information. As you said, the emotion loneliness is just giving you information that something is wrong in your social support system. Something has happened in your life, or you have done something, or your support system has done something that makes your needs not being met. If you're feeling depressed and down and low on energy, it's information that you need to do changes. The same, if you're feeling fear and anxious, it's information that something in your life is wrong. Either you need to change your support, you need to change your job, you need to, so all these emotions, even anger is an incredibly powerful information. If you are frustrated or angry, something is wrong in your life. But again, all at the same time as I'm saying that this is information, it also is supposed to be there. We're not supposed to create a life where negative emotions doesn't exist. We're supposed to have them there. If you're grieving, that's healthy. If you are depressed sometimes, it's healthy. If you're anxious, it's healthy. So finding a balance of understanding that you should listen to your emotions and try to take it as information to make changes in your life. You should also accept them as a beautiful part of life. Because the biggest lesson about mental health that I've learned is also that when you try to suppress negative emotions, the positive emotions disappear. Because our mind is not designed to only feel the good emotions. It's designed either you feel or you don't. So if you suppress properly, like many men do, you also become melancholic in the middle, in the sense that you just become numb. So you don't really get excited or happy, and you don't really get sad. But I would rather be a human being that can get angry sometimes, frustrated sometimes, very happy sometimes, and depressed sometimes. So I think that's kind of the beauty of life. So emotions are information, they're natural, and they're a system that is part of being human that actually makes it kind of fun being human at the same time. That's where love comes from, as you said as well. So the reason why many women and men are so upset and go on social media and rant out and say, I will never talk to a man again, is also because of the love that was there that you enjoyed so much that you now have lost, and this person hurt you, that doesn't mean that everyone else is going to hurt you. Because again, as you said, if we take away trust, empathy cannot rebuild and heal the wound. So I think that goes just as much for friendship, family, as it does for partners in life. So I think, again, the beauty of the human aspect is that life is supposed to teach us something.
Yeah.
You can go through any challenge in world. We humans are incredibly powerful in dealing with challenges, but we do such much better if we utilize community and the people around us, and if we talk about it openly. That's when actually challenges in life becomes our growth, and we can actually become a really cool grandmother or grandfather, in the end of the day, because we've been through so many challenges and we're reflected around them. So I guess that's the goal in life, is to become a really cool grandmother or
Yeah.
grandfather.
Amen to that. So as we wrap up, I just got some quick rapid questions I want to ask. First things first is individuals who may be listening, right? And who feel a sense of this helplessness, that there's a lot going on, but what can they do? What would be your advice that you would give to individuals who want to get involved in mental health advocacy, both on a personal and organizational level?
The first thing is, of course, you can go into the human aspect. You can search for the challenges that you go. You can search for loneliness, depression. And if you choose depression, you will also see the mini documentary. It's just, I think it's just 9 minutes long, the one about depression. And the one about loneliness is 13 minutes long. I challenge you to just watch that. Watch the whole documentary and see what happens after that, what it makes to your mind. But also, if you feel really hopeless, as I said, the first thing you probably can do on one side is to try to open up to one person you trust. It's not going to change by tomorrow, this situation, because normally it takes some time for it to change, but it's going to positively impact it. And there's another small thing that is important to remember. Even if you have suicidal depression, the most challenging of all within mental health, you're still allowed to have a great time. You're still allowed to feel joy, because the beauty of the human mind is also, as you can see in children. I've seen a lot of children in war, and I've seen a lot of children in extreme poverty, where in an adult mind, there shouldn't be any reason why this child should be happy and laugh, because there's nothing around them that give them any reason to laugh if you look at it from an adult's eyes. But the beauty of children, which is the purity of the human mind, is that if you take a football, even if it's made out of cloth and the wrapper tape, and you throw it to them, they will completely forget that they are in the middle of this shithole, sorry my language. And then they will smile and they will laugh, and then when they're done, they will be a little bit depressed and sad again. And you can do exactly the same if you feel hopeless. Try to do one activity that you enjoy, where you for at least a short time period can forget that you're so in trouble, if it's financial trouble or relationship trouble, or because we need a break. We need a break from hopelessness. If you sit in hopelessness too long and alone and isolated, it will kill you. If you dare to get a break and open up to people, you can actually get out of it. And if you want to get involved in advocacy, I think one of the best things you can do is you can search up local organizations around you. You can engage yourself in the church community, in the mosque community, because I'm also a little bit concerned about the trend that everyone that has overcome a challenge and everyone that is still in a challenge want to become a mental health advocate. We don't need that everyone in the world who is facing something difficult, as you said, is become a social media expert on it, or a coach, or a speaker. We need that people who feel that they want to get involved do so in their local community. And then the very few of us who overcome it fully with perspective or that has a talent to talk in a podcast, or has a talent to become an influencer, or that is already a celebrity, so you have a platform. I think the people in those spaces should try to focus on this because, as you said, you need some emotional space between yourself and your challenge before you can actually be useful in that. But you can always be useful if you support people in the community. That you don't need to overcome your challenge to be useful. And that's also something I've learned from the interviews that a lot of people have said has been life-saving for them, is to feel useful. They were a volunteer at the church, or they helped out cooking, or they supported their sister who with moving. So I think that is probably the most important element. And join and start and be part of conversations. If you're going through something tough, dare to talk about it in not just a personal level, dare also to talk about it in the way Tony and I did now, of saying, I'm feeling hopeless and depressed, or I'm feeling traumatized. What in society is part of my feeling? Because normally the way we feel is not just to blame on our own life and the people around us. And we don't want always to talk about me. I also want us to talk about, why is society making us depressed? Why is society making us lonely? Because having those conversations when you're in the middle of a challenge, you can actually feel that you have something to contribute with. And suddenly you feel extra smart. And that is also, I think, healthy for you. I think I would wrap it up in that.
Yeah. So, finally, I think the last question would be, how can individuals and organization collaborate or support the Human Aspects Foundation?
Organizations, reach out if you think the Human Aspects Library could be useful in your work. For example, as I said, if you're a community health worker, we have user guides and support resources that we could provide you with that would make it easier for you to use the library resources in your work. So just reach out and we can support you by sending those. And of course, the best way to utilize the library, because it's free, it's available to anyone, is for you to use it to support your friend. Share it with your sister. Share it with your boss if you think it's useful. If you're a teacher, use it in class. Use it to create a discussion in school with your students. There's so many ways of using it. Just share in your Instagram story a video from our platform, because talking about it doesn't need to be you talking about it. You can share the video of my story, for example, and you can say, this is exactly how I'm feeling right now. I want to bring out Jimmy, someone who has overcome it, because I want us to talk more about depression. Instead of you making a video, as you said, crying about depression, which is not the right place to express it. Is maybe you can do that with a friend or someone who can actually be there for you, instead of seeking the attention of the social media. So I think that could be a beautiful way of doing it. And we have so many things you can share with friends or on your platform that is, therapeutic for the world and for people who feel like the way you feel.
Okay. So, how can people find the Human Aspect Library? What are the websites, the social media handles, and the rest of it?
It's the Human Aspect everywhere, so it's easy. Humanaspect.com, Human Aspect on Instagram, Human Aspect on TikTok, Human Aspect on Facebook. So it's the same handle everywhere. And we also have a podcast that is called Aspects. So if you go to Spotify or Apple Podcast or Google Podcast and you search for Aspects, you will also find the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jimmy. I'm so really grateful for giving me this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I'm looking forward to future collaborations. And like I said, please, if there's any way or anything I can do to help, just always reach out to me. I'm always open and available. And yeah, looking forward to us maybe doing this sometime in the future. And do take care of yourself and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to coming to Nigeria. As I said, we are coming to Nigeria at one point as well for an interview tour. Very excited about that. We don't know when yet.
I'll be looking forward to that also.